Hello, and welcome to another U.S. Tech Workers podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lynn, and today is June 14, 2021. And I have the great pleasure to be joined again by someone who is no stranger to our podcast, attorney, author, tech guy, John Miano. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Kevin.
Well, it's great to have you back, John. And you know, I'm particularly happy to see you today because we've actually been getting people asking for you to come back and talk about the EAGLE Act, which is I'll read it here, Equal Access to Green Cards for Legal Employment Act of 2021. Now, for those who think, wow, this is something totally new, it's really not. Once again, Zoe Lofgren, the nemesis of working men and women across America, has reintroduced essentially the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, only with a twist or two. And the great thing about having you here today is, John, is I thought you could take us through it. Let us know, of course, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what's new, what's not new, and without any further ado, I'll just kind of let you run the boards on this one, John.
Okay, well, let me just go to the here it is, screen scare. Go to the bill itself, and like the big thing about this is it gets rid of the per country quotas for green cards, for employment-based green cards. So to allow the H-1B flow from India to take all the green cards. Well, I should say not quite all the green cards. If you look at here, this page that I have up here reserves green cards for the rest of the world. So in the first year, India only gets 70%. India and China, which would be the first top two countries.
Yeah, but the truth is, John, isn't it true that India far outpaces China with regard to the number of people stuck in the employment green card cube?
Yeah, I mean, China. If you're from China, this bill screws you, even though you're one of the two countries. I think the people from my next door neighbor is in the green card queue from China, and he knows if this passes, he has no hope of getting a green card. What this does, it does say just the top two countries, and I'm probably it says that so that it doesn't look like it's just for India. But imagine, for example, if somebody in Congress put out a bill like this that reserved all but 30% of green cards for England and Scotland. So you would know that. I mean, you know the reaction of that.
A small bias there from the rest of the world.
We would say racism, racism, racism. Well, here, Zoe Lofgren has done something, but put forth the most racist bill ever in Congress. This, to give all the green cards to India, and they use this kind of hidden language to try to avoid the racism call. But she should be called out. But what it does is it gives 30%. The rest of the world gets 30% of the green cards the first year, 25% the second year, 20% the third year. Then we move to the next page. And it keeps on declining to 5% after the 7th, 8th, and 9th year. But in reality, this is kind of backwards because in reality, India will never really get up above like 80-85% just because of the number of H-1B visas given out. India gets 85% of the visas, so the 5%. By the time we get to a 5% reservation, the rest of the world, that doesn't really mean anything. But basically, what you have here is a complete replacement of the 1965 system of diversity in immigration with one of exclusively for India. And I mean, you really have to wonder, who do these people work for? I mean, who does Zoe Lofgren work for? I mean, if you went out to the the average American on the street and then asked them, do you think we should give reserve 70% of the green cards to India? I can't imagine that you get many people who will say that outside maybe the Indian community. But I mean, here you have a bill that does just that. The other little twist to this bill is it has these little faux repairs to the H-1B program.
Right. Isn't it kind of they inserted some paragraphs in from Grassley-Durbin's bill?
Well, they're sort of, but not little bits. But I'll go over here. One of the big problems in the H-1B program is that there's a restriction that the employer first step in making the H-1B visa is to file a labor condition application with the Department of Labor where they say, this is the prevailing wage, this is what we're going to pay the person, and we've behaved and done all the things we're supposed to do. The problem is that Congress in 1991 enacted a provision that requires the Department of Labor to approve all labor condition applications unless there are obvious errors and inaccuracies errors or inaccuracies. So that basically, as long as the form is filled out correctly, DHS can't contest it and has to approve this within 7 days. So the H-1B system is
300,000 applications in 7 days. Hello.
Yeah. Well, and even if they did look at them, they're only allowed to check to see the form is filled out correctly. So here, as in quite a number of bills that quote claim to fix the H-1B program, if you look at the bottom of this page, it talks about inserting only for completeness and for completeness, clear indicators of fraud or misrepresentation of material fact. Well, fraud has an intent requirement. So this is basically saying that they can check that currently they can check if there's obvious error, but then they'll say obvious error or fraud or misrepresentations of material fact, which are higher standards. So this change has absolutely no effect whatsoever. Okay?
I'll be done.
So this should show you what a fraud Zoe Lofgren is, because it illustrates that she knows, like everybody in Washington, where the problems in H-1B law are. And right here, because she's so tied to lobbyists and such a tool of lobbyists that she's going to go out of her way not to fix them. Okay, so this is an example. They know what the problem is, and they're not going to fix it deliberately. And the next one I would add to you was on the next page here. Let's see. Here we changed the prevailing wage system. Okay. So currently,
which would be good.
Well, not like this. Currently, the system says that you have to pay the higher of the prevailing wage for the occupation and location, or the wage paid to similar employees. So if you have an incompetent buffoon, he still has to be paid the prevailing wage for the occupation location, gets boosted up. If you get a good person, he has to be boosted up even more. Okay? If he's above average, he's supposed to be boosted up even more. Now, this provision gets ignored because of the previous provision I described, because the employer can put anything down as a prevailing wage, know it's going to get approved, and that's been done since the beginning of the H-1B program, which is why H-1B workers are paid so much less than Americans are. Well, this is saying that the prevailing wage has to take into account employers having the same duties and responsibilities as the H-1B worker. So what that would then do is say, the employer can now say, this is a junior person, and so I can pay him at the bottom of the barrel. Which technically wouldn't have any effect unless they close the other loophole. But It's just adding another loophole to the system so that if the other one gets addressed, then they'd have this one to fall back on to allow them to pay low wages to H-1B workers.
Wow. Tragic, John, just tragic.
Well, these people don't work for us. I mean, this is the fundamental problem in Washington. We can't, and the voters keep sending the same old people back and back election after election, and then wonder why nothing changes. Well, if you're going to keep sending people like Zoe Lofgren to Congress, this is why things aren't changing. And I hate to be picking on Zoe because there are a lot of others in the same boat. But we send the same incumbents year after year, and nothing changes.
Now, the thing is, there's also like in Grassley, Durban, there was the portal that they would set up to advertise jobs. Yeah. They're going to do that again. They're going to do that. That is in this.
That's it.
The problem was it didn't seem to be really a sufficient reform to begin with.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just that is in the bill, that have an online recruitment, but that's it's not going to do anything. Plus, there's a lot of. The problem is there are a lot of provisions here that just don't do anything. For example, there's one that makes it illegal to put out advertisements that say H-1B only. That's right. Provision there. Well, that's already illegal, and the employers still do it anyway. So making it illegal again doesn't do any more. And the only reason it's in there is so that people can say, "See, we're cracking down," when they're not cracking down.
Yeah, because at the bottom line, at the end of the day, John, this bill is the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, which is the elimination of the country quotas for the employment-based green cards, which would allow Indians to essentially dominate the green card cube for the next 10 to 15 years. There's nothing. I mean, the reason we have this backlog, this enormous backlog, is because of the dual intent nature of the H-1B visa program. Right. Is there any reform to that? Are they getting rid of the dual intent in this, John?
No, I mean, because no one wants to fix this problem. I mean, so basically what happened is prior to 1990, people came to the United States as either immigrants or non-immigrants, and you could possibly circumvent the two, but it was difficult. There were ways of getting around it, but here we just made an open flow. Anyone who comes on an H-1B or an L visa can get into the green card queue, and employers love this because now they can say, get into the green H-1B queue first. Work for me as an indentured servant for years, and then we'll put you into the green card queue, which is years and years and years. And I suspect the big business would love this green card queue going on forever and ever as well. But I think word is getting out that we've basically reached the impossibility point of getting a green card in the current system for someone from India. Now there's people estimate that it's 60, 70, 80 years for someone from India now to get the green card. But that's solely because of the H-1B program. India got in early and often on the H-1B program and has monopolized it and has learned to take over. The Indian interests have learned how to take over the system. So now they're trying to use that. Oh, we've taken over the H-1B program, so let's take over the green card system as well. Because the reality is, and for the rest of the world, you can get a green card without a problem. If you're from Mozambique and an employer goes up to you and says, "I'd like to hire you, I'll get you an H-1B visa," you can say, "Oh, no, I want a green card. I'm not going to come here on an H-1B visa." And the employer in theory can make an application for a green card and bring that person in. They don't have to go through the H-1B system. If you're from India, because H-1B choked the green card system, you can't get in. But basically, the question is, why are we trying to screw the entire rest of the world so that we can lessen the problem for India that's been created because of the H-1B program? And I mean, the solution to this is simple, and dual intent for H1B and the infinite extensions for H1B visas. And over time, this problem will go away. But Congress will never do that in its current configuration with congressmen who are totally bound up to immigration lawyers and big businesses.
If you were king, John, and you could say, okay, here is the H-1B visa reform bill that I want to see pushed through and is going to get signed into law, what would be some of the key tenets in that for you? Because you'd mentioned elimination of the dual intent nature of the H-1B.
Well, if we did, we're going to fix H-1B, basically requires starting from scratch because it's a convoluted mess. It's about 10 times longer than it needs to be. So if we were to fix H-1B, you get rid of the dual intent and make it strictly a non-immigrant visa, like the H visas used to be.
Okay.
You would eliminate the restrictions on enforcement. Again, that's making the bill shorter. Get rid of the restriction on enforcement, and require the prevailing paying at least the prevailing wage, or even higher than prevailing wage. But it should be
right. You would think that would be a key component, because a country that was looking out for the best interests of its citizens would say, okay, we want to make sure the corporations have to really make a genuine attempt or to hire an American. And one of the facets of that would be, if we have to go overseas, we're going to pay a premium, for that foreign worker, maybe 20, 30%. Why not? Then they'd pay an American, because, it's just amazing to me. Do you have any other thoughts for planks for a reform, John?
Well, that's basically it. There's three things: get rid of the restrictions on enforcement and in dual intent, and require the actual prevailing wage be paid. And if you do that, you have a very, very short bill. I mean, the thing is, the problems in the immigration system are known. When people talk about we need to fix the immigration system, it's largely kabuki theater. We do everything possible not to fix the immigration system. So in 2013, we had the massive Gang of Eight bill of 1,198 pages that was fraudulently passed off as comprehensive immigration reform. There was no reform in that bill. What has sadly happened in Washington is that whenever it's come time to reform anything, taxes, immigration, whatever, an army of lobbyists descend on Washington. The congressmen hire lobbyists to help them, and we get no reform. If the country were serious about immigration reform, there'd be some hearings that would get together where we would decide, how many people do we want to come in the United States?
Right. What's because somehow there must be a scientifically derived number for how many we need. Generally speaking, there should be a number, and here it should be backed up with any number of studies. And in fact, the Jordan Commission back in the 90s, had come up with numbers and ideas and recommendations based on studies done by the National Academy of Sciences. But we kind of shelved that when it.
We don't pay any attention to those numbers. I mean, one of the ways to do it, a simple one to tell you, would be based on population growth. Set a target population. How many immigrants do we need to head towards that target population ceiling, and adjust it every 10 years with the census. That I'm not saying that's perfect, but that's an example of a method you could do to say how many. But right now we don't have any.
Right.
We don't have any system. It's no one will say what kind of limits. We don't want to have limits. We look at the southern border right now. It's an utter chaos because no one wants to enforce. Because certain interests don't want to enforce limits. And the second step is after you define what those limits, then you have to define how to break those limits up and allocate them among the different types. Right now our system is overwhelmingly favoring family-based immigration. Do we want it? Is that what we want to do? Do we want to have it more, allocate more to employment?
Merit, right?
Merit. Personally, I would get rid of officially employment-based immigration entirely. Why do we say, why does employers get to pick who we're going to get to come to the United States? We could say, hey, having a job is a big boost to becoming an immigrant, but it becomes a factor, and immigration is based upon the immigrants controlling their own fate. But again, big businesses don't want to do that because then they don't have control of the slave labor. Immigration lawyers don't want to do that because that means their business is based upon individual clients rather than big corporations with big stacks of money. So we're going to, there remain much inertia against reform. And, one of the things is that, and really until the press, starts insisting on real reform, rather than celebrating frauds like the 2013 bill and calling it reform. If we had something, the media actually pressing for actual reform so the public would know what's going on, there might be some hope of real reform. But right now, there's nothing on the horizon that's going to happen.
Right. It's and the thing is, the citizenry, they just take it in the shorts time and time again. We were talking about numbers and how do you allocate. They sent the latest census data for STEM those with STEM degrees came out, and still under 30% of those who graduated with STEM degrees are actually working in STEM. And this you got to ask yourself, how could this happen? Because, according to that same study, STEM jobs pay easily $14,000 to $30,000 more than a non-STEM degree on average. So between $87,000 and about a little over $100,000. So this doesn't make any sense. That everyone who graduates with a STEM degree should be gainfully employed in that field of study. One, they probably went into a great deal of hock to get that degree, when you look at student loans and the cost of tuition, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense unless you, as you said, you factor in the grift.
Well, if you have ever been on the job seeker side of the technology jobs, then you would know why that's the case. The employers make it difficult to find jobs, and that's probably a podcast in itself. But the employers aren't actively looking. They put up the barriers for the jobs, and if you go to a typical job board like Dice, try to find the jobs from real employers. Almost everything posted is from some third party, which may or may not exist, and then you see the same job posted 50 times. And
I hear that all the time. Yep.
But then the tech industry will then say, look at those 50 postings of the same jobs and say, see, we have 50 jobs open that no one can fill. And that's how you get these huge unfilled job studies looking at these job boards. But
are you familiar with the Facebook, the DOJ complaint against Facebook?
I've read about it. I'm not familiar with the details.
But right there, when they were moving from H-1B visa to PERM, H-1B visa, you don't have to demonstrate that they've looked, for an American to fill a job. However, the PERM position, they do. Well, they have a whole game that they orchestrated where, it's very difficult to find those positions. They advertise them in actual, paper periodicals. You apply through snail mail, whereas they've already got the foreign candidate who's going to be taking that job. They're not interested, as you said, in looking for Americans for these positions.
Well, that's the fraud of this. Another problem of this H-1B to green card system. You have a low threshold system applying to a higher threshold. and the public is woefully unaware of the details of what go on here. I mean, if you went out on the street and said, "Do you realize it's legal for employers to replace Americans with foreign workers?" They would say, "No, you have to show you can't find an American first." Well, that's not true. That's not true.
No, because as we've talked in the past, John, the H-1B visa program is working exactly the way it was designed to, and that is to displace Americans.
Yeah, it's the only, if Congress were to get rid of the annual limits on H-1B visas, which is the only thing business groups seek to change the H-1B program, you'd have a perfect system for replacing Americans with cheap foreign workers. It's the only thing. But with that, and not getting that, then they've done the OPT thing,
right? Which they're more optional practical training workers who have EADs in the country now than there are H-1Bs. Oh. I mean, it's a great system because even better than H-1B because the employers can pay them anything they want. It's practical training. Mm-hmm. And the same thing will, happens. Again, they're kind of indebted to that employer. Okay, so then the employer might then sponsor them for an H-1B and then maybe down the road a green card. It's essentially indentured servitude for, easily 10 years, quite possibly more. And I think this has a devastating impact on the ability of our country to produce STEM workers as a result, as well as on innovation in the companies, because they might think that they're protecting their turf, but at the same time, they're not. It's having an impact on innovation. No one's taking ideas. You don't see, people engaging in SneakerNet and building their own, taking their own companies and their experiences and, building a better mousetrap as a result. It's really a frightening place to be. I mean, whereas, we once dominated tech, I mean, we have a lot of competitors now.
I've worked at a number of companies that replaced their American programmers with foreign workers. I dodged that bullet myself, but I would say that every single company that did it regretted it in the end. Mm-hmm. They didn't save any money. And the other thing I'd also add is the national security issue and basic security. I mean, basically, we have all our medical data accessible from overseas. We have all our personal data that's being sent overseas. All our banking data sent overseas. Imagine you're a foreign intelligence service. I mean, it's just it's a gold mine. And the other thing that's eventually it's going to happen is there's going to be a massive computer break-in resulting from this movement of data overseas. That North Korea is going to take $200 million from a U.S. bank and transfer it out over a weekend. I mean, it's inevitable that that's going to happen in the current environment. Mm-hmm. But we just ignore it. In fact, the Equifax break-in came through. Right. A hack was through flawed software developed overseas. So, and if that wasn't big enough to get people to move, you have to sit there and wonder what will be.
Yeah, or a plane falling out of the air. That's not big enough to get people to move and kind of question, offshoring and outsourcing. Yet it just seems we're in a race to the bottom in so many ways. But on the one bright side, last Congress, when they introduced the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, it had the first day over 100 sponsors. And the first day that the EAGLE Act was introduced, it had only 19. So it looks like there's not a lot of enthusiasm for this bill. I think they're going to find there's a lot less enthusiasm for it in the House than the last Congress, and I don't see it getting over the chasm in the Senate. So,
yeah, I think people begin to learn about it. I mean, the big thing, the previous bills were depending on stealth to get through. Right. And I think everyone knew it. Everyone knew that if people found out about what this bill did, it'll never pass, which is why there weren't any hearings on it. You have the most radical change to American immigration policy in the nation's history. Nancy Pelosi rams it through without any hearings.
Right, with the using the same techniques that you would use for naming a post office.
Yeah.
No floor debate, just insane. And again, in the Senate, same thing. They were trying to sneak it through with unanimous consent. That procedure, talking in front of an empty chamber. It's just absolutely tragic. But I'm optimistic. It may not have long legs this session, but you never know. We have to be mindful of it. And so, to our audience, people like John, you do the yeoman's work, U.S. tech workers. We are there in the fore, defending the skilled workers in America. And, to do that, it requires a lot of effort and resources. And one of those resources is money. So you're watching this, be sure to go to the ustechworkers.com site, go to that donate page. It's all there on the front page. Go ahead, click it, hit the donate, and, give us what you can afford. If you can afford to be a monthly donor, that's the best of all. That way, you'll never miss an opportunity to donate to our organization. I think we've done great work, but we need to do more all the time.
Yeah, I got to say, you guys have made a big impact over the past few years, and it's quite amazing. And the other thing that's also quite amazing is how much of an impact you've made relative to the amount of money you use.
Yeah, I know. If I was having dinner last year in DC and they asked what our staff count was, none of them could believe it. They were like, no way that you do what you do with the smallest staff. But it's, we have a lot of, our people are very dedicated. They work long hours. They know what they're doing. And we have great activists that are force multipliers in all of this. But, we have folks like yourself, John. Anything we can do to help you, we do, because what you're doing with your H-4 EAD lawsuit, with your OPT lawsuit, if you prevail in either of those, it'll change the dynamic. Has the potential, wouldn't you say, to change the dynamics?
Right, potential. But on the other hand, if we lose, it has potential to change it for a bad way too. So on the flip side, I said, I've come to depend upon U.S. tech workers, for support in these activities and for help in advancing stuff. And the tech community needs to get more involved in what's going on politically that directly affects them. They don't seem to see what's going on in the large, because like companies like Microsoft, they spend millions every single week on
every week. It's amazing to me the kind of lobbying efforts that hit the Hill and are highly effective. When you think about it, look back to pre-1990. American tech workers were not just in demand here, but all over the world. People were traveling to Switzerland, to London, to Korea, working for 18 months and then taking 6 months off and hitting it again. That's a very different world than it is today. And part of that is there was not an effort to come together, a union, a guild where there was a society of fellow workers looking out for each other. And we can't do it without everyone in the game. One way or another, you have to be looking out. Everyone has to be looking out for each other in this world, because no one's coming to save anyone. Yeah,
it is a community thing. You've got to be looking out for your brother, because they're not looking. The other side works together. It's the funny thing is that we sit there. Tech workers don't do it, but the big businesses, they come together. All the big rivalries in tech come together to fund these initiatives here. And I wouldn't be surprised if you found, every behind this particular bill, big money flowing in from, companies you would think are on opposite sides of the fence.
Yep. Exactly. They shot down 3 of the important reforms of the Trump administration, which was the specialty occupation, the prevailing wage, end of the lottery. And then all of a sudden, too, to add insult to injury, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, they go ahead and file suits to make sure none of those 3 raise their ugly head, their heads again. It's really, so it is. I mean, they put a full court press and they have a lot of resources. So we really do need to come together and work together.
Well, I won't go to politics, but when elections have consequences, folks, and
yep.
when you make a man who voted to make it legal to replace Americans with foreign workers president, this is what you get.
And he voted for NAFTA, GATT, WTO, all of those things that absolutely destroy the working men and women in this country. Well, John, how do you have a website, or is there any way people can get a hold of you if they want to reach out?
Well, my email is kind of out there in public, so people seem to have a easy time just search Google for me.
Gotcha.
Pretty much out in the open. I don't have a website for this kind of thing.
I do want to show everyone your book. There we go. Your book sold out. Mm-hmm. You and Michelle Malkin wrote this book. It is the definitive book on the abuse of the H-1B visa program and thoughts for reforms. Still available on Amazon, although it's in paperback and it's in a red cover. That's kind of like the only difference.
It's the book the tech industry does not want you reading.
Yeah, there you go. Well, John, I want to thank you very much for joining me here today, chatting with our audience. We'll get this up before the Friday newsletter goes out. And that's another thing. Be sure to, when you're on the website, click the button for the weekly hash. The newsletter has information that you won't find on our Twitter, Facebook, and other social media accounts. So be sure to sign up for that. Also, we run the risk because of what we do that we could be deplatformed on any of those platforms at any time. So if we have you on our newsletter, we'll be able to keep communications going. Again, John, thanks for joining me, and audience, thanks again for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Bye-bye.